Good morning.
Technical difficulty.
Yes. So have you ever had a conversation that starts out simply? Maybe it's over coffee or by the office printer, and somehow it became something deeper. I know you have. It's at first you're talking about what I joke with my family: work, weather, and weekend plans. That's what we talk
The
about.
3 W's.
Yes. And then something subtly or really suddenly shifts in the conversation. The topic becomes about things that really matter, about longing or fears, about hope, about what it means to be alive in times such as these. Well, that's exactly what happens in the text for today's message. What started out as small talk becomes soul talk. And when we last met, we left 2 solitary figures, a woman and a man, standing beside the ancient well of Jacob. The well had been a place of thirsty encounters already for centuries. The man, Jesus, was hot and tired and parched from his travels. The woman, a Samaritan, stands with her empty water jar in the heat of the noonday sun, which is just an understatement if you're in the Middle East. Today, we return to that well to listen more deeply to their conversation as it unfolds, and as we wade into the deeper waters of truth. On the surface, the topic of their conversation is water, the kind of water that's necessary for life, but it only satisfies for a little while. It's the physical thirst that they begin talking about. Yet when what begins as a request for a drink of water, like a kid might say at bedtime, becomes an invitation to truth. Jesus hints to the Samaritan woman that there's a different type of water, a soul-nourishing, spiritual kind of water, living water that can never run dry. I don't think we'd be mistaken to rightly assume that this woman is quite familiar with the Hebrew symbol of living water. It's mentioned numerous times in the Torah as a symbol for God's sustaining and renewing, even refreshing presence. But it's clear as we go along that she's not quite grasped the deeper truth in Jesus' words, at least not yet. So I want to read again the exchange, the first part of their exchange from John 4, as I've paraphrased from the Message Bible, just to freshen our memories. A Samaritan woman came to draw water from the well where Jesus was sitting. Jesus said, "Would you give me a drink of water?" The Samaritan woman, taken aback, asked, "How come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" A Samaritan and a woman. Jesus answered, "If you knew the generosity of God, and if you knew who it is that is saying, 'Give me a drink,' you would be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh, living water." The woman said, "Sir, you don't even have a bucket to draw with, and this well is deep. How are you going to get this living water?" Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks this water in this well will get thirsty again and again. Anyone who drinks the water I give will never thirst, not ever. The water I give will become an artesian spring from within, gushing fountains of endless life." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't ever get thirsty, won't ever have to come back to this well again." And he said, "Go get your husband and then come back." "I have no husband," she answered. And Jesus replied, "You've spoken truly, I have no husband, when in fact you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. You have spoken the truth, sure enough." So I imagine conversations at that well unfold pretty easily, kind of casual, like the small talk that people are into when neither one of them plans to go any deeper. After a short, polite exchange of niceties, someone decides to move along. But this conversation, the one between the Samaritan woman and Jesus, is a holy one. The writer David White says, "The conversation is the relationship." Maybe that's why this moment beside the well matters so much. It's not just because of what's said, but because both Jesus and the woman stay long enough to be changed by listening, deeply listening. Not only do they both listen, they both ask honest questions of each other, and they both give honest answers. Each one of them takes the risk to remove a mask and reveal the truth of who they really are. And somewhere in this honest exchange, the waters of grace begin to flow. There's a vulnerability in their sharing, so much so that Jesus, the rabbi, honors Hebrew tradition by instructing the Samaritan woman to come back with her husband before their conversation deepens any further. Like the heavy bucket of cool water drawn up from the depths of Jacob's well, their dialogue rises slowly to reveal new understanding and deeper revelations. I love that it's Jacob's well, this ancient practice that's enclosed and contained, and out of it comes new revelation. The Samaritan woman bravely challenges Jesus with thoughtful, curious questions. She doesn't shy away from meaningful dialogue with this Jewish rabbi, but instead she takes an active role in the conversation, asking him pointed questions. How? Why? Where? Who? Her honest questions draw Jesus in to the conversation. And then Jesus responds with honesty. And then he continues to draw her carefully into a deeper truth. And this one is the truth about her life story. And he responds to her answer with grace and acceptance, honoring her honesty by saying, "You have spoken truly. You have spoken the truth." transformation begins right here in this story, where grace and honesty meet, where a thirst for understanding encounters generosity and assurance. We touched on last time that for centuries, this Samaritan woman has been perceived as having a questionable past, as though her having 5 husbands and now a live-in male, we don't know their relationship, is some sort of moral failure on her part. Much of the focus on her historically has been a litany of her sinful qualities. And it's a passage that has often been thrown at women who are divorced more than once as sinful quality. But Jesus, if you look at it, he doesn't call her sinful. He calls her truthful. And so I'm wondering if we've misunderstood her all along. What if her past isn't about shame, but about survival and resilience? Her stating that she had no husband might have been a declaration of independence. Jesus' grace-filled acceptance of her story makes room for us to consider that hers is not a scandalous legend or some cautionary tale. It's the story of one woman's endurance and strength when society would judge otherwise. And the Samaritan woman's willingness to speak truth to the power that even her culture gives this Jewish rabbi opens the door to further grace and revelation. Through her courage, we can begin to see that transformation doesn't come from feeling ashamed or being shamed. It doesn't come from feeling less than or being judged as too much. It doesn't come from that. It's not a confession, but a transformation. I thought about how rare such conversations like this can be, where truth can rise up without fear of being shamed. I once sat with a woman who she'd lost a lot, almost everything, and a lot of it was because of her own doing. And we talked at length not to give her blame or to find solutions, but about what felt like a thirst, her thirst for peace, for understanding, for her finding way forward. After our conversation, I realized that healing doesn't begin with answers. It comes from truth that is met with and held in compassion. The story of the Samaritan woman and Jesus also invites us to reflect on our own selves more deeply. What truths might we too uncover when we allow ourselves to be deeply seen and heard? Warts and all, husbands and all. Are we willing to allow the inner light of Christ to show us truths we've kept hidden, whether it's from others or truths we've hidden from ourselves? And on the other side of the conversation, how do we nurture a generous presence of grace that is both curious and non-judgmental? And again, do we even extend that kind of presence to our own selves? Another query that the Samaritan woman begs us to consider is how often do we assume we've been told the story about someone and that it's really true. There's an old saying that encourages us to consider that might not be the case. Rather than take someone's word about a story, we can get it straight from the horse's mouth, or we can dig for a deeper truth rather than the interpretation that history or others have readily handed us as a truth. It might not be true. I've even heard the saying, don't believe that every thought you think is true. So how do we dip deeper into the well for truth? Until next week, we'll leave these two strangers mid-conversation standing by the well of living water. They stand in between a space of grace and truth, compassion and honesty. Little does the Samaritan woman know the deeper truth of Jesus' life-changing revelations, or how that truth will flow from him to her and beyond into her community. We read often of women bringing the gospel to others. But right at this point, transformation has already begun between the two of them. I think most of us live in that space as well, somewhere between thirst and revelation. We haven't seen the whole picture yet, but if we listen closely, something within us is always stirring if we listen deeply. And maybe this is what it means to drink from living water, that fountain, that well from within us. It means to tell the truth we know, to listen deeply for the truth that is still bubbling up, and to trust that grace will meet us in the ordinary. At the coffee shop, at the job, or in the checkout line, by the well, in the heat of the day, and in the ongoing sacred conversation between our thirsty souls and God's generous grace. So it is. Amen.